Starting off with each topic in the history of modern India, let me take you through a timeline with some important events of modern Indian history to get a sense of the subject at a very broad level. The history of modern India is largely centered around Indian encounters with the Europeans, and there specifically the ones in Western Europe. That is a curious fact, isn't it? So, how did that happen? Well, India was widely known for its spices, textiles, precious stones and other commodities which fetched high prices in the European markets. But when the Ottoman Empire captured Constantinople in 1453, the direct contact between the Europeans and India declined. To re-establish trade links, Western European countries like Spain and Portugal invested their resources to find a trading sea route to India. One of these earliest expeditions was led by Vasco da Gama, a Portuguese explorer. He succeeded in reaching India through an all-sea route circling Africa at the Cape of Good Hope to reach Calicut in 1498. Over the next few years, the Portuguese started establishing factories and settlements in the coastal regions of India. And to oversee these developments, the Portuguese also appointed governors in India. The next European traders to arrive in India were the Dutch. In 1602, the Dutch East India Company was formed. The Dutch mostly had their eye on establishing trade in the East Indies, the region presently known as Indonesia. They also had trading centers in India where they set up many factories. After the Dutch, there came the English. They came just behind the Dutch in Surat in 1608. They hoped to establish a textile factory in Surat, but were unsuccessful as the Mughals declined the offer due to the Portuguese influence. This convinced the English that overcoming the Portuguese was the means to establish trading in India. Hence in 1612, the English defeated the Portuguese naval squadrons at Swali near Surat, winning themselves the Mughal support to establish a factory in Surat in 1613. By 1619, they had received permission to establish many other factories in India. In 1620, the Danes arrived in India. They also established factories in India, but they were known for their missionary activities rather than commerce. Meanwhile, the Dutch were aware of the increasing might of the Englishmen and felt that it posed a challenge to the Dutch interests. As a result, they clashed with the English from 1665 till 1667. At the end of the Second Anglo-Dutch War, the Dutch had to give up all their settlements in India. The last of the Europeans to come to India were the French. The French created the French East India Company in 1664. One of the prominent contributions of the French was the development of Pondicherry in 1674. The French expansionist policy in India was challenged by the English. These traditional rivals fought with each other in the three Carnatic Wars to establish supremacy in the Indian subcontinent. This period also shows the diplomatic abilities of Robert Clive, a commander in the British East India Company. His role was pivotal in defeating the French during the Third Carnatic War. Robert Clive also battled against Siraj-ud-Daulah, the Nawab of Bengal, and his French support at Plassey in 1757. Clive's decisive victory at the Battle of Plassey gave the British East India Company control over Bengal, which was arguably one of the biggest regions back then. British in India is often attributed to factors such as their naval superiority, military skill, discipline, and so on. Still, there were internal factors that facilitated the British. One of the most significant of them being the decline of the Mughals in India. The Mughal Empire had expanded to such an extent that a centralized ruling system was ineffective. The unity and stability of the empire had been shaken up during the long and strong reign of Aurangzeb. Yet, the administration was still quite efficient, and the Mughal army was quite strong at the time of his death in 1707. Many policies launched by Aurangzeb were largely controversial and gave rise to the regional conflicts. Many rulers after Aurangzeb lacked strong leadership qualities and corruption was rampant. To make matters worse, the invasion of Nadir Shah in 1739 and multiple invasions of Ahmad Shah Durrani between the years of 1747 and 1769 left a huge blow on the Mughal Empire. This led to the decline of the Mughal Empire. Meanwhile, many other kingdoms such as the Marathas, Mysore, Sikhs, Bengal and Hyderabad had arisen. These kingdoms further engaged in succession wars for the Mughal throne. The association of the Europeans in regional politics and the succession wars accelerated the decline of the Mughals. In addition to the decline of the Mughals, winning the Carnatic War and the Battle of Palasi gave the British a stronghold in the subcontinent. Their victories allowed the British East India Company to appoint puppet rulers in Bengal, Carnatic, etc. Bengal, however, was their crown jewel. In 1759, the Dutch and puppet Nawab of Bengal, Mir Zafar, attempted to recover Bengal. But the Dutch forces were bested by the British in the Battle of Chinsura. By 1764, Nawab of Bengal, Mir Qasim, Nawab of Awadh, Shujauddaulah and the Mughal Emperor Shah Alam II conspired to recover Bengal from the English. The combined army lost to the English in the Battle of Buxar, and the Mughal Emperor became a pensioner of the East India Company. In 1765, the Treaty of Allahabad was signed at the end of this particular war. As per the treaty, Mir Qasim handed over the regions of Midnapur, Bardhaman and Chittagong to the English for maintaining their army and also permitted duty-free trade in Bengal. Meanwhile, the Mughal Emperor Shah Alam II gave the English the Diwani of Bengal, Bihar and Odisha. After the Battle of Buxar, the British established a dual form of government in Bengal by which Diwani or power to collect taxes was carried out by the company and the Nizamat, that is the police and judicial matters, by the Nawab. Essentially, the Nawab had to depend on the English to maintain order and peace in the state. But the dual government system was ineffective, as the Nawab and the company had neglected the public welfare of the state. Hence, when Warren Hastings became the governor of Fort William in Bengal, he abolished the dual government system and remodeled the administration. Warren Hastings was appointed to the role by the Regulating Act of 1773. This act brought about the British government's involvement in Indian affairs in the effort to control and regulate the functioning of the East India Company. It recognized that the company's role in India extended beyond mere trade to administrative and political fields. It introduced judicial reforms as well by setting up the first Supreme Court. Warren Hastings also brought effective means of tax collection between 1772 and 1774. In 1774, he acquired a new title as the Governor General of British East India Company, supervising all English settlements in India. Meanwhile, in the south, the British might was challenged by the Mysore kingdom led by Hyder Ali and later by his son Tipu Sultan. They fought 4 wars between 1767 and 1799, which are popularly known as the Anglo-Mysore Wars. The British fought the first 2 wars against Hyder Ali. Tipu Sultan continued the war after the untimely death of Hyder Ali during the Second War and faced forces sent by Lord Wellesley in the 4th. From time to time, the neighboring kingdoms such as the Marathas, Nawab of Carnatic and Nizams of Hyderabad aligned with the British to subdue the Mysore rulers. Governor General Lord Wellesley managed to gain support of the Nizam of Hyderabad through the subsidiary alliance to defeat Tipu Sultan in 1799 and placed a young Budiyar ruler as their puppet. The subsidiary alliance was a tool introduced by Lord Wellesley during his governorship from 1798 to 1805. According to this system, Indian rulers had to pay a subsidy to the British to maintain the army. In return, the British would protect them from their enemies, both internal as well as external. But through this alliance, Indian rulers also lost their sovereignty over their territories to the British. The Nawab of Awadh was the first ruler to take up the subsidiary alliance after the Battle of Buxar. However, the Nizam of Hyderabad was the first to accept a well-framed subsidiary alliance. Tanjore was another prominent region to become a part of the alliance. The Marathas, they also became victims of this alliance. During the reign of Chhatrapati Shahu Bhosle I, the 5th Chhatrapati of the Maratha Empire, Gaikwads of Baroda, Bhosles of Nagpur, Holkars of Indore, Sindhias of Gwalior, and the Peshwas of Pune came into prominence, and the empire evolved into a confederation. The confederacy was under the Peshwas' rule and worked well until the 3rd Battle of Panipat in 1761. The defeat at Panipat and the death of the Peshwa Madhavrao I in 1772 weakened the control of the Peshwas over the confederacy. While each family ruled independently with a united front against the British, they often tended to quarrel amongst themselves. The Marathas and the British engaged in 3 wars from 1775 to 1818, which let the British control members of the Maratha Empire one by one. Finally, in 1818, the British took control of the Maratha territory and abolished the Peshwaship. Sindh joined the subsidiary alliance in 1839, which gave British considerable control over the region. Although the British had assured territorial integrity to the Amirs of Sindh, they annexed the region after a brief campaign by Sir Charles Napier in 1843. Meanwhile, the Sikhs tried to keep the British at bay, but both engaged in 2 all-out wars between 1845 and 1849 called the Anglo-Sikh Wars. The British annexed Punjab and the war ended with some Sikh squadrons eventually fighting alongside the British in the years to come. Lord Dalhousie, the Governor-General from 1848 to 1856, used the doctrine of lapse to annex many regions. As per the doctrine, if a ruler of a princely state controlled by the British died without a male heir, the British would gain control of the territory. While the adopted son of the ruler got the right for the ruler's private property, the British had the final say in bestowing the state to the adopted son or annexing it. States such as Satara, Jhansi, Nagpur, Bhagat, Udaipur and Sambalpur lost control through the doctrine. While Many frustratingly became part of the British Empire by accepting these rules. Some of them resented the policies and administration of the British from the beginning. The revolt of 1857 is a prominent example. The revolt began at Meerut on 10th May 1857, and the immediate cause was the refusal by sepoys to use the greased cartridges in infield rifles provided by the British Army. Before this, Mangal Pandey, a sepoy of the 34th Native Infantry, attacked a British officer at Barakpur on 29th March 1857. The revolt was a cumulative effect of the British expansionist policies, economic exploitation, and administrative changes over the years that had adversely affected all rulers of the Indian states, sepoys, zamindars, peasants, traders, artisans, pandits, Maulvis, etc. The revolt rippled across the country, especially Delhi, Meerut, Lucknow and Kanpur. Thus, the event is considered the first war of independence by many Indian nationalists and historians, although imperial loyalists call it the Sepoy Mutiny. While the revolt produced regional leaders like Nana Sahib and Rani Lakshmibai, the British were also able to capitalize the lack of a strong single leadership and end the reign of the last Mughal emperor, Bahadur Shah Zafar. Queen Victoria was declared the Empress of India, and through the Government of India Act in 1858, East Indian Company transferred control of India to the British Crown. India fell under the direct rule of the British. By 1859, the British managed to quell the rebellions in different parts of the country, essentially re-establishing their authority over India. Apart from the subsidiary alliance and the doctrine of lapse, the British introduced many policies to control the Indian kingdoms. In 1784, Pitt's India Act was introduced to distinguish between the commercial and political functions of the company. This act gave the British government supreme control over the company's affairs and administration in India. The enactment of Charter Acts was done every 20 years from 1793 to 1853. This was another step that led the British East India Company extend its control over the British territories in India. Further, acts gave more power to the British by opening trade from company to all British subjects and expanding the Governor-General's jurisdiction from Bengal to most of India. Another important step taken by the British was the permanent settlement introduced by Lord Cornwallis in Bengal and Bihar in 1793. This regulation recognized zamindars as the owners of the land, and the peasants were reduced to the mere status of a tenant. Moreover, the government fixed a whopping 10 by 11th portion for itself and 1 by 10th for the zamindars from the collected revenue. While these acts strengthened the British control over India, some British policies developed elements of a modern state in India. And a prominent example of such policies is the abolition of sati in 1829. It was passed by the first Governor-General of India, Lord William Bentinck, with the efforts of Raja Ram Mohan Roy and other Indian social reformers. Bentinck also enforced the prohibition of female infanticide, which was then prevalent among some Rajput clans and other castes. In 1856, the British passed an act that allowed Hindu widows to remarry. The passing of this act can be attributed to the prolonged efforts of social reformers like Pandit Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar. Another area of social upliftment that the British revolutionized was education. The Charter Act of 1813 directed the company to sanction 1 lakh rupees annually for encouraging Indians in education and promoting the knowledge of modern sciences. This was further encouraged in the famous Lord Macaulay's Minute of 1835, which favored teaching of Western sciences and literature through the English language alone. Another major impact on education in India was when Charles Wood, the Secretary of State, sent an educational dispatch in 1854. The dispatch suggested that the government of India should take the responsibility of educating the masses in India. It proposed the use of vernacular languages to impart education in primary schools and English as a medium to instruction in higher education. The significance of Wood's dispatch was that it gave the impetus to establish departments of education and universities in Calcutta, Bombay and Madras by 1857. After 1857, the British Parliament understood the importance of reinforcing its control in India. Hence, in 1858, the Government of India Act was passed. As per the Act, India came under the direct rule of the British, and as a promise, the British Empire agreed to remain strictly impartial and not interfere in social and religious matters of India. The Act also helped in establishing an administrative structure in India. The Viceroy was given the highest authority and was advised by an executive council. The first Viceroy of British India was Lord Canning. In 1859, a new revolution started to take shape in the form of peasant revolts in the eastern parts of the country. The peasants of Bengal had begun protesting against the forced plantation of the indigo crop. These riots forced the British government to appoint an indigo commission to investigate the issue. Many planters from the lower Bengal region had to shift to Bihar too. Similarly, the whole of India was suffering from the British rule. In the urban areas, the middle class had started developing a sense of patriotism through the influence of Western education, the Indian Renaissance, and the growing print culture. They sought education and realized that the imperial rule was severely exploiting India's economy. This and the lack of representation in the government prompted them to participate in the regional movements across the country actively. In 1861, Lord Canning enacted the Indian Councils Act, which allowed the Indians into the Executive Council. Even though Indians were nominated to the council, they had no statutory provisions to bring change as they were non-official members. Further, the British government noticed the rise in nationalism and enforced repressive measures like the Vernacular Press Act of 1878 to curb the spread of nationalist thoughts in the vernacular newspapers. While many protested against such laws, slowly the nationalists learned that building a united front could pressure the British government. And against this backdrop, many nationalists tried forming political associations such as the Indian League, the East India Association, etc. But none of them were able to launch a united front against the British exploitation of India. One of the most prominent associations was the Indian National Congress. It was established by A.O. Hume, a retired English civil servant, along with other Indian nationalists in 1885 at Bombay. And this session was presided by W.C. Banerjee. The association there onwards met every year in December in different parts of the country to discuss the political and administrative plan for the upcoming year. The establishment of Congress is considered a crucial point in Indian history as it led the foundation of the Indian national movement. From 1885 to 1905, the majority of the Congress followed the moderate approach. The Congress leaders during this period believed in constitutional agitation within the confines of the law. Their two-pronged approach aimed at first creating a strong awareness and public opinion among Indians by awakening their consciousness and united them. Second, it also aimed to persuade the British public and the government to introduce reforms in India. One of the demands of the INC was the reformation of the Legislative Council and elections. And as a result, the Indian Councils Act of 1892 took shape. It increased the number of additional members in the imperial and provincial legislative councils, but maintained an official majority in them. So, it didn't seem satisfactory to Congress. Meanwhile, the British decided to take some administrative steps to curb the spread of nationalism in its crown jewel, that was Bengal. In 1905, Viceroy Lord Curzon publicly shared his plan to partition Bengal. And on 16th October 1905, Lord Curzon executed the partition of Bengal despite the opposition by Indian nationalists. As per the British government, this was a step for administrative convenience. But the Indian nationalists, they recognized this was divide and rule policy of the British, as the partition divided Bengal into Hindu majority Western Bengal and Muslim majority Eastern Bengal. Leaders like Surendranath Banerjee and Anand Mohan Bose had played an important role in protesting against the partition. From 1905, a new set of leaders had a dominant influence in Congress. These leaders are referred to as assertive nationalists or extremists who led the nationalist movement between 1905 and 1918. Congress even launched the Swadeshi and boycott movements which aimed to make India self-reliant by promoting Swadeshi goods and boycotting British manufactured goods. Congress sought a radical change in its approach at this point. Under the presidency of Dadabhai Naoroji, Congress believed that they had to take direct political action and challenge the British authority to achieve Swaraj. Amidst this backdrop, there also emerged another group of nationalists who opposed the British, the revolutionaries. The revolutionaries believed in the use of violence to overthrow the British rule. Bengal, Maharashtra, Punjab and parts of South India became the centers of such activities. Meanwhile, most of the upper and middle class Muslims of East Bengal supported partition as it enabled them to gain majority representation. To this end, in 1906, they formed the All India Muslim League under initial leadership of Nawab Salimullah of Dhaka, along with Nawabs Mohsinul Mulk and Waqarul Mulk, and demanded separate electorates. By 1907, the moderate and the assertive nationalists argued about the direction of the nationalist movement and methods to be undertaken against the British. And this resulted in the split of Congress party in the Surat session. The British responded to the Swadeshi movements and the split with lathi charges and detention, due to which the Swadeshi movement declined by 1908. Further, in 1909, Lord Minto, the Viceroy and Secretary of State John Morley worked out a plan to gain support of the moderates and the Muslims. This plan is widely known as the Morley-Minto reforms. Through these proposed reforms, Indians were allowed to participate in the Legislative Council elections on limited franchise, while also providing a separate electorate for the Muslims. It also planned to expand the Legislative Council to include more elected Indians. Finally, in 1911, the partition of Bengal was annulled on account of revolutionary activities, and the capital of British India was moved from Calcutta to Delhi. During World War I, revolutionary activities broke out yet again in favor of Indian independence. The Ghadar Party, established in 1913 in Oregon, USA, actively participated in armed revolutionary activities from 1914 to 1917 in Punjab. Back in India, nationalists such as Bal Gangadhar Tilak and Annie Besant launched the Home Rule League of their own to demand self-government within the British Commonwealth and educate everyone on policies through newspapers, public meetings and other such means. But gradually, this faded in 1919 due to lack of proper organization, communal riots, the arrest of Annie Besant and many other reasons. After fizzling out of the Home Rule League, a new phase emerged in the nationalist movement, the Gandhian phase. Gandhiji returned to India from South Africa on 9th January 1915. His idea of satyagraha was a novel method of mass agitation that used the power of truth and non-violence to fight injustice. He used satyagraha in several movements such as Champaran Satyagraha in 1917, Ahmedabad Mill Strike and Kheda Satyagraha in 1918. The era from 1919 to 1939 is known as the era of mass nationalism. The British even enacted the Government of India Act in 1919. It is also known as the Montagu-Chelmsford Reforms. This act sought to increase the number of Indians in the Legislative Council and admitted Indians to the Council of the Secretary of the State of India. It also established a diarchy system in the provincial governments. But then, the act had many drawbacks. Moreover, before the act was implemented, the British government had passed the Anarchical and Revolutionary Crimes Act, popularly known as the Rowlatt Act. Against this backdrop, Mahatma Gandhi planned to launch a nationwide satyagraha, also known as Rowlatt Satyagraha, on 6th April 1919. But soon, the movement turned violent in many parts of the country, and in Punjab, it resulted in the Jallianwala Bagh incident, which forced Mahatma Gandhi to call off the movement. Mahatma Gandhi looked for a widespread, non-violent movement that would involve both Hindus and Muslims as a united front. In 1919, a Khilafat committee was formed to force the British government to change its attitude towards Turkey. Mahatma Gandhi joined hands with the leaders of the Khilafat committee, Shaukat Ali and Muhammad Ali, to launch the Khilafat non-cooperation movement in 1920. The INC also endorsed the movement at its Nagpur session. The movement unraveled in different stages. First, people gave up their titles, left schools and colleges, boycotted courts, legislative councils, and gave up British goods. Then, if the British used repression, the movement would lead to civil disobedience. While the movement received good participation from peasants, students, and women, the participation among the middle class reduced over time. Unfortunately, Mahatma Gandhi was forced to call off the movement in 1922 in the wake of incident in Chauri Chaura, present-day Uttar Pradesh, and the British arrested him. After his imprisonment, the national movement became passive. Motilal Nehru and Chittaranjan Das wanted to end the boycott of legislative councils, and use it as a platform for political struggle and to arouse popular enthusiasm. Difference in opinion over the question of council entry had led to the formation of Swaraj Party, or specifically the Congress Khilafat Swaraj Party, on 1st January 1923. And after a few years, this party eventually merged with the Congress in 1930. Meanwhile, socialist ideas had begun to take a stronghold in the subcontinent in the late 1920s. Many young people who participated in the non-cooperation movement were unhappy with the way it ended abruptly. The Swarajist program didn't appeal to them either. While socialism was embraced by Jawaharlal Nehru and Subhash Chandra Bose in the Congress, there emerged two powerful parties of the left: the Communist Party of India in December 1925 and the Congress Socialist Party in October 1934 under the leadership of Jayaprakash Narayan, Acharya Narendra Dev and Meenu Masani. Another significant event in 1920s was the Bardoli Satyagraha led by Sardar Patel. Hit by floods and famines in 1925, the Bardoli farmers were adversely affected. However, the tax rates here were increased by the Bombay Presidency. The farmers couldn't afford to pay higher taxes. The authorities weren't budging despite the farmers' pleas. Finally, the farmers invited Vallabhbhai Patel to launch a protest movement. The Satyagraha resulted in the government setting up a commission to look into the matter, and Vallabhbhai Patel emerged as a national leader. Another significant event during this decade was the arrival of the Simon Commission. In 1928, the British appointed an all-English member commission under the chairmanship of Sir John Simon to evaluate constitutional reforms needed in the future. It was a part of the provision in the Government of India Act of 1919 that suggested that the British would appoint a commission that would study the progress of the governance scheme and suggest a new course of action. The Simon Commission was greeted with popular protests as there were no Indian members in the committee. Nonetheless, the Simon Commission submitted a report in 1930 suggesting changes like the abolishment of the diarchy system and the establishment of a representative government in the provinces which should be given autonomy. But its recommendations were held back and the report was held back for matters of higher priority. In the same year, Indians were challenged by Lord Birkenhead to draft a constitution that was accepted by everyone. The nationalists called for an all-party conference and appointed Motilal Nehru as the chairperson of the drafting committee. The report, submitted popularly known as the Nehru Report, had demands like dominion status for India that was accepted by Congress but disapproved by the younger members such as Jawaharlal Nehru and Subhash Chandra Bose. They wanted to demand for Poon Swaraj, while the Muslim League, Hindu Mahasabha and Sikh communalists disapproved this particular report on different grounds. But Viceroy Lord Irwin disregarded their demands. Following this, Jawaharlal Nehru was elected as the president of the 1929 Lahore Congress session. It was in this session that the Congress demanded Poon Swaraj for the first time and declared 26 January 1930 as the Independence Day. And on 31st December 1929 at midnight on the banks of River Ravi, Jawaharlal Nehru unveiled a new tricolor flag of freedom amid slogans of Inqilab Zindabad. To further reinforce the resolution of the Lahore Congress, Mahatma Gandhi presented 11 demands to Lord Irwin, which also included the abolishment of the salt tax. On 12th March 1930, Mahatma Gandhi and 78 others embarked on a journey from Sabarmati Ashram in Dandi to break the salt law. And thus, the civil disobedience movement was launched. This movement spread across the subcontinent and had a similar enthusiasm as the British boycott movement. Meanwhile, the first roundtable conference was held in London between the British and the Indians based on the recommendations of the Simon Commission and of Jinnah to Lord Irwin. This was the first conference arranged between the British and the Indians as equals. However, amidst the ongoing demand for Poon Swaraj and the civil disobedience movement, Congress decided to boycott the first roundtable conference. The movement came to an end with Mahatma Gandhi and Lord Irwin entering into an agreement with the Gandhi-Irwin Pact on 5th March 1931. On 29th March 1931, the Congress met at Karachi. It was only 6 days back that Bhagat Singh, Sukhdev and Rajguru had been executed. They were charged for the revolutionary activities against the British, including the murder of ASP Saunders. Bhagat Singh's role in anti-imperialist revolutionary activities, including the throwing of a bomb in the Central Assembly on 8th April 1929 to oppose Trade Disputes Bill, had garnered him support from the youth across India. So, when the revolutionaries were executed, there was anger among people, especially the younger left-wing section, as to why Gandhiji had not been able to get his execution cancelled under the Gandhi-Irwin Pact. The Karachi session was where Gandhiji endorsed the pact and prevailed upon the Congress members to approve the agreement, as he was convinced that Lord Irwin and the British were sincere in their efforts to negotiate with the Indian leaders. Adhering to the pact, Mahatma Gandhi attended the second roundtable conference in London, but returned disappointed as the negotiations did not go well. So when Gandhiji returned, he resumed the civil disobedience movement. Gandhiji and other Congress leaders were arrested and the Congress was declared illegal by the new Viceroy, Wellington. One of the limitations of the civil disobedience movement was the lack of the Dalit participation. To uplift the Dalits from oppression, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar established the Depressed Classes Association in 1930. He clashed with Mahatma Gandhi during the second roundtable conference held at London in September 1931 to allocate separate electorate for the Dalit population. B.R. Ambedkar's dreams saw the light of the day when the then Prime Minister MacDonald in 1932 decided to grant communal award to the minorities and the depressed classes, by which separate electorates were given to them in the election of members of the provincial legislative assemblies. Gandhiji, who was against this idea, undertook a fast while in jail in Pune to revolve this decision. Later, both arrived at a consensus with the Pune Pact of 1932, in which the Dalits were given more reserved seats in central and the provincial legislatures. The third roundtable conference took place in London in November and December of 1932. With many leaders of Congress behind bars, the third roundtable conference was conducted without the participation of the Congress. The recommendations of this conference became the basis for the Government of India Act 1935. The Government of India Act 1935 ensured autonomy to the provinces and abolished the diarchy system in the provinces, and also provided for a bicameral legislature at the center. Instead, Congress demanded convening a constituent assembly to draft a constitution for an independent India based on universal adult franchise, and rejected this particular proposal. Against this backdrop, in 1937 provincial elections, Congress claimed a majority in all provinces except Bengal, Assam, Punjab, Sindh and the Northwest Frontier Province, and emerged as the single largest party in Bengal, Assam and Northwest Frontier Province. Congress was able to bring some changes and reforms within the system, but their command was short-lived. On the outbreak of the Second World War, the British had declared India's support without consulting Congress. However, the Congress wanted to use this opportunity to secure complete independence. They had several discussions with the Viceroy Lord Lilithgow, but nothing proved fruitful. This resulted in members of the Congress resigning from the ministries. However, in January 1940, the then Viceroy stated the dominion status of the Westminster variety after the war is the goal of the British policy in India. Congress did not want to accept anything less than the complete independence for the country and declared that they wouldn't support the war efforts of the British in the Ramgarh session of the Congress in 1940. On the other hand, at Lahore, the Muslim League also passed a resolution to demand a separate state and sovereignty for the Muslim majority areas in the northwest and the east parts of our country. By 1940, the war took a brutal turn for the British. Hitler had Belgium, Holland, and France struggling, putting Britain in a difficult position. By August 1940, Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru decided not to take advantage of the British misfortunes during wartime. Congress proposed to compromise by forming an interim government during the war period, but the government presented a counter-offer. This proposition is widely known as the August Offer. The British proposed dominion status for India and expansion of the Viceroy's Executive Council to have more Indians. It also proposed setting up a constituent assembly after the war where mainly Indians would decide the constitution. But the Congress declined the offer because they wanted complete independence from the British. However, the Muslim League accepted certain allocations made in the offer but was firm on forming a separate state. The British, however, did not budge and refused any form of constitutional advance unless the Congress came to an agreement with the Muslim communalists. They did everything in their capacity to prevent the Congress from starting a mass movement again. Ordinances were passed to the effect of curbing freedom of the speech. The Congress asked Gandhiji to take command. So Gandhiji initiated a limited satyagraha called individual satyagraha to be taken up by select leaders from various localities against the British. By 1942, the war was wearing on the British, and with the threat of the Japanese attack on India, British unwaveringly sought to secure India's support. As a result, in March 1942, the British sent a mission headed by Sir Stafford Cripps with constitutional proposals to seek India's support in the war. The proposal received criticism and objection from both Congress and the Muslim League. The Congress objected to the dominion status of India as they wanted complete independence, while the Muslim League wanted a separate state and rejected single united India. Thus, the Cripps mission had failed. But the possibility of a Japanese invasion grew by the day, and the British failed to manage it. The prices of the commodities rose to the peak. Considering the situation, the Congress decided to take action and passed a resolution demanding an end to the British rule in India. And thus, they launched the Quit India movement in August 1942. Mahatma Gandhi also accompanied this with the slogan, "Do or die." In response, the British responded with brutal repression. Many nationalists were arrested and some went into hiding. By 1943, the Indian freedom movement had additional support by the Indian National Army led by Subhash Chandra Bose with the assistance of the Japanese army. The Azad Hind Fauj or INA planned the military campaigns to liberate India from the hands of the British. The INA also marched with the Japanese army in the hopes to defeat the British and establish a provincial government in India. But as the Japanese lost the war, INA was also defeated. By 1945, Subhash Chandra Bose was reported to have succumbed to a plane crash. After the Second World War ended in 1945, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill was keen to provide a solution for the Indian Constitution and retain India in the British Commonwealth. appointed Lord Wavell to draft a plan for the same. The Wavell plan proposed that with the exception of the Governor General and the Commander-in-Chief, all other members of the Executive Council would be Indians with equally represented Hindus and Muslims, and also the inclusion of the Sikhs and the depressed classes. This plan was discussed during the conference at Shimla. The League insisted that only League members could be the Muslim representatives in the council and opposed to the Congress nominating Muslim members. The Congress discredited the plan, saying it made them look like an elite Hindu party. Since the Congress and the League could not settle their differences, the conference was a failure. The next year, in 1946, the British faced a new challenge in the form of Royal Indian Navy mutiny in February. What began as an opposition to the poor living and working conditions by the non-commissioned officers and sailors or ratings against the British soon turned into mutiny against the British rule in India. Naval soldiers gathered in Bombay and they were joined by Royal Indian Air Force men as well. Although the mutiny succeeded in gaining mass support, it did not receive much support from the Indian leaders. The mutiny finally came to an end on 23rd February 1946 with the intervention of Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. After Clement Attlee became the Prime Minister of Britain in 1945, he sent a cabinet mission which included Patrick Lawrence, Stafford Cripps, and A.V. Alexander to negotiate a peaceful transfer of power to India. The mission arrived in India in March 1946 and suggested a plan by May. As per the plan, India would be granted freedom without any partition and the provinces would be divided into three groups, forming Muslim majority and non-Muslim majority provinces. A constituent assembly was also to be formed to draft India's constitution, the drafting committee of which would be later chaired by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. While Congress had their apprehensions, they accepted the Viceroy's invitation to form the new interim government. But Jinnah and the Muslim League were not satisfied as it rejected the demand for a full-fledged Pakistan. They wanted to accentuate their demand for a separate Pakistan state and protested by calling 16th August 1946 as Direct Action Day. Many large-scale communal riots broke out at various places in India, causing equally large fatalities. With the rise of communalism in India, partition seemed evident at this point. On 28th February 1947, Clement Attlee, the Prime Minister of Britain, declared that they would relinquish their power in India by 30th June 1948. He named Lord Mountbatten as the Viceroy of India, succeeding Lord Wavell. Lord Mountbatten worked around the partition plan or the 3rd June plan, which both Congress and the Muslim League accepted. Finally, on 18th July 1947, the Indian Independence Act received the royal assent, and on 15th August 1947, India was an independent country.